The woods behind Windermere were old, older than anyone could remember. The trees were thick and twisted, their branches forming a canopy so dense that even in the daylight, the forest floor was draped in shadows. The locals of the small town nearby avoided the woods, claiming they were haunted. The whispers, they said, were the voices of those who had entered but never returned. Lena Summers had heard these stories her whole life. Growing up in Windermere, it was impossible not to. But she didn't believe in ghost stories. At 23, she had long dismissed the local legends as superstitions meant to scare children. That's why, when her best friend Claire suggested a camping trip in the woods to celebrate the last days of summer, Lena didn't hesitate. Claire was the adventurous one, always looking for the next thrill. She loved hiking, exploring, and pushing the boundaries of what was considered safe. Lena admired her for it, though she often found herself following Claire into situations she wasn't entirely comfortable with. Still, a camping trip in the woods sounded like a perfect escape. The afternoon they set out, the sky was clear, the air crisp, and the forest, though dark, seemed peaceful. They walked for hours, laughing and talking, their backpacks heavy with camping gear. By the time they found a clearing, the sun was already dipping low on the horizon, casting an orange glow through the trees. They set up camp, built a small fire, and settled in for the night. As the fire crackled and the stars began to emerge, the mood shifted. The cheerful energy from earlier had faded, replaced by a heavy silence. Lena noticed how quiet the woods had become. No birds, no insects, just the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was eerie, but she didn't mention it. Claire, however, seemed unfazed. She poked at the fire with a stick and glanced up with a mischievous grin. "Want to hear something creepy?" she asked. Lena rolled her eyes. "Is this where you tell me the woods are haunted?" Claire chuckled. "Well, they are haunted, according to the locals. But there's more to the story than just some old wives' tale. They say that if you're in the woods after dark and you hear whispers, you should leave immediately." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Whispers?" "Yeah," Claire said, her tone dropping to a whisper. "Voices. Some say it's the spirits of the lost, trying to lure people deeper into the forest. Others say it's something older. Something that's always been here." Lena smirked. "Let me guess, no one knows what happens if you don't leave." Claire shrugged. "No one's ever come back to tell the story." Lena laughed, but the sound was hollow in the quiet of the forest. She tossed another log onto the fire, trying to shake the unease creeping up her spine. "You're ridiculous," she said, but her voice sounded uncertain, even to her. As the night wore on, they retreated to their tent, the fire slowly dying to embers. Lena lay awake, staring at the tent ceiling, trying to ignore the sense of dread that had settled in her chest. Claire was already asleep, her breathing deep and steady. Lena wasn't sure how long she had been lying there when she heard it. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the wind in the trees. A soft murmur, like someone speaking just out of earshot. She held her breath, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, though she couldn't make out the words. They seemed to come from all directions, circling the tent. She turned to wake Claire, but as her hand reached out, the whispers stopped. The woods fell silent again, so abruptly that it made her heart race. She sat up, listening intently. Nothing. Just the wind. "Get a grip, Lena," she muttered to herself, lying back down. But as soon as her head hit the pillow, the whispers started again. This time, they were clearer, closer. They weren't just whispers. They were voices, soft and pleading, like someone was calling out for help. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she sat up again, scanning the darkness outside the tent. She could see nothing but the faint glow of the dying fire. Suddenly, Claire stirred beside her, her eyes fluttering open. "Lena," she mumbled groggily. "Shoo," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" Claire blinked, her expression confused. Hear what? The voices. Claire frowned, sitting up and listening. After a few moments, she shook her head. Lena, it's just the wind. No, Lena insisted, her voice shaking. I'm telling you, I hear voices. Claire sighed and rubbed her eyes. You're letting that stupid story get to you. But before Lena could respond, the voices grew louder, more distinct. This time, Claire heard them too. Her eyes widened, and she grabbed Lena's arm. Do you hear that? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising chorus of whispers outside the tent. Lena nodded, her pulse racing. What do we do? For the first time, Claire looked scared. We need to get out of here. They scrambled out of their sleeping bags and grabbed their flashlights. As soon as they unzipped the tent, the wind hit them, carrying with it the sound of whispers, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the shadows between the trees seemed to move, as if something was lurking just beyond their sight. Claire grabbed Lena's hand. Come on. They ran, the light from their flashlights bouncing wildly as they stumbled through the trees, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The voices followed them, growing louder and more desperate. Lena could hear them clearly now, frantic, pleading, as if the speakers were in terrible pain. Help us, they cried. Don't leave us. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, fear clawing at her throat. The voices were so close, as if they were right behind her, but when she glanced back, there was nothing but darkness. They kept running, the whispers pressing in on them from all sides, until finally, they broke through the tree line and stumbled onto the main road. The moment they left the forest, the voices stopped. The air was still, the silence deafening. They stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, too terrified to speak. Finally, Claire turned to Lena, her face pale and eyes wide. We're never coming back here, she said, her voice shaking. Lena nodded in agreement, too shaken to argue. The next day, they packed up their campsite in silence, neither of them mentioning the events of the night before. But as they walked back through town, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped the forest. The whispers still echoed in her mind, soft and insistent. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind was just right, she swore she could still hear them calling her name.